Welcome to my fifth and final set of book critiques. The books are waiting, so let's hop right in. The feature text for this set is the classic modern fantasy Where the Wild Things Are, written and illustrated by Maurice Sendak. This book opens the door into the imagination of a young boy, Max, who gets into a fight with his mother. As Max is sent to his room, he drifts off to sleep, and the reader is able to follow him on his journey through time and space to the land of his dreams, where the wild things are. Max ventures with these creatures until he becomes homesick and drifts back home. This piece of literature has been extremely possible with children for decades. The fantastic elements, rhyme of the text, and emotion-packed illustrations are just a few reasons this book has stayed popular through the years. I believe it is important to use classic literature that children assume is simply for entertainment to instruct students. This shows students that there is something to be learned from every book they read, no matter the content or purpose of the text. There are a few ways I think this book could be used in the classroom. The first is to teach fourth graders about the genre of fantasy and allowing them to practice writing their own fantasy stories. After reading the book with the class, each story element, such as setting, characters, and plot, will be addressed in discussion. Then, students will be given the opportunity to practice what they have learned by creating a thing link. The students would use an image from a fantasy picture book or chapter book as the background, and then meaningfully place the buttons on their thing link to correspond with the story elements. On each button, the students would add their rationale for how this element of the story adds to the fantasy of the story. Here is an example of a thing link that could be created using an image from Where the Wild Things Are. Having all these ideas for fantastic elements to add into a story, the students would then use a writer's workshop time to create their own fantasy story. The revision time would be completed in small groups of peers, focusing on the fantastic element of the story, ensuring the story is adequately filled with fantasy. These would be shared with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Middle Grade and Young Adult Writer Organization, which supports young writers. Another lesson idea that I created was a social-emotional lesson for preschoolers. This text is diverse in its uses, and effective illustrations allow it to make for a good springboard for a lesson on expressing emotion. After reading the story, the class would collectively come together to pick out the emotions portrayed in the book. In addition to identifying the emotion, we would talk about healthy ways to express and communicate that emotion to others. The students would then use an iPad to access Flipgrid that was created by an older classroom. The older students would have added videos of themselves explaining a scenario where they had a strong emotion. The students would then respond to their scenario and explain ways that they could help the older students to express themselves in a healthy way. This Flipgrid would then be used for behavior management in the classroom, referencing the videos when students were happy, upset, or angry to give them ideas on how to express their emotions well. Here is an example of a Flipgrid I created where the emotion of anger is expressed.
My mom told me I couldn't play outside. Now I'm angry.
Hey Teresa, you might want to try talking to your mom and letting her know how you feel, and also taking a couple deep breaths.
There are many other books blooming in this set, so let's explore them. The second book I read was One Morning in Maine by Robert McCloskey. Though void of fantastic adventure as seen in Where the Wild Things Are, the everyday events presented in this book remind you of the true adventures in the life of a child, such as a trip to the store or losing a tooth. Next, I read Snowflake Bentley by Jacqueline Briggs Martin. I heard of Wilson's Bentley's work before reading this book, but I was able to better understand his dedication and his parents' sacrifices in order to make these wonderful images possible after reading this story. Then I traveled to the North Pole on the Polar Express, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. Though I was familiar with the story, this was the first time I actually read the original book, and I understand why it evokes feelings of wonder, even in the oldest children. From the North Pole, I sailed to Scotland, where the traditional song of Always Room for One More was written down by Sorch Nick Littahas. This traditional song was artfully written and illustrated to allow all to experience the beauty and liveliness of Scottish culture. Though not a song, the next book I read was focused on musical instruments. Zin Zin Zin, a Violin by Lloyd Moss connects rhyming, music, and counting into one lively book, making a symphony come alive on the pages. Another book that keeps you engaged until the last page is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie by Laura Joffe Numeroff. One little mouse has many things he would like to do, allowing students to laugh at his antics and the parents to connect with the exhausted friend in the story. Lastly, I read a book I remembered from 3rd grade, Dear Mr Henshaw by Beverly Cleary. I was astounded at the literary merit this book possessed and that I was unaware of when I first read it. This book takes the reader through an emotional roller coaster, reminding them it will all work out in the end. Thank you for watching.